All right, everyone. We've got T minus 3 minutes, T minus 3 minutes, T minus 3 minutes. And then we'll kick off this class. For those of you who are in me in Mumble, can you actually see what I'm sharing?
Yeah, you're good. Yep.
Cool, cool. And if anybody's in the stream, could I have somebody try to type something in stream chat, and let's just see if the chat's working there.
Looks like working to me.
Hey! Cool! Technology, I tell you. Thanks for the notification there, Bitdefender. Yeah, I would recommend muting the audio on Twitch. Seeing if
Yeah, I
that
did that
works.
too. Just too much echo otherwise because of like 2-second delay, what it is automatic for Twitch. I think a bit less than that.
Yeah, I think if you're on Mumble, you'll want to mute that Twitch audio. Does that work? T minus 1 minute, and then we'll kick this class off. And thanks everybody for coming. It's great to have you all here. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and get started with my preamble here. I do like to talk, so hopefully you all are here to listen. But I'll go ahead and get kicked off with the preamble. I'm Yuri Levnik. I've been playing Eve since 2017, with a break in the middle. I'm primarily a PvP pilot, so most of what I do is player versus player fleet commanding with the Uni. But I do other stuff as well. I do some exploration, I do some incursions. I'm a mentor, so I try to mix it up a little bit. But my real heart of my experience in Eve is fleet commanding PvP fleets. And with that in mind, today we are going to talk about a topic near and dear to my evil pirate heart, introduction to weapon systems. Or this wonderful tagline here, 101 ways to make ships explode. So I have a lot of feelings about weapon systems, and I will be taking you all through a pretty comprehensive list of all the different kinds of weapon systems available, really more for subcapitals than capital ships, and we'll have I think a chance for you all to learn some things about guns and missiles and drones and Voltron projectors and what have you. Questions are welcome. I'm going to do my best to monitor Classroom Bravo class questions and also the Twitch stream. And if you're here with me in Mumble, you are welcome to ask questions in Mumble as well. I'll answer most questions immediately. If it's a question that requires more thought or that we'll get to later in the presentation, I may kick your question down the road a little bit. Nothing personal. How we doing? Audio good? Everybody ready?
Yeah, all sounds great.
Yep.
Beauty. Okay, so class rules. We want push to talk or just a comprehensive mute and mumble, and I see everybody's done that already, so good work. Again, questions are welcome. You can type them. In Twitch, you can type them in Classroom Bravo. You can ask me out loud on Mumble. You cannot ask me in game like it says here because I'm not in game right now. And I guess you should preface your questions with Q, but really I'm fairly literate, so as long as you make it in the form of a question, I should be able to read it and parse that you're asking me something. And with any class, we always recommend staying docked up. I mean, if you want to go mine in high sec, you'll probably be fine, but this is not a great activity to go out there and take your flashy Myrmidon and do some ratting in nullsec while you're trying to pay attention to the class. And if you get blown up, I'm not going to SRP you. So, sorry about it. This class is about weapon systems, as promised. And we'll go through a number of different weapon system topics here, because as with anything in EVE, it's complicated. So we want to go through turret mechanics and turret types. That's our first type of weapons that we'll work through is all the different turrets. Then we'll talk about missiles, and then we'll talk about drones. And then there's a few other weapon systems that are none of the above, but are relevant and important. So we'll actually spend a bit of time on things like smart bombs and other more obscure but still important weapon types. And then we'll have a Q&A. So here's the way that factions usually use weapons. So, starting from the top left here, we see energy turrets. Hopefully you see energy turrets. That is only used by Amarr. So Amarr ships use energy turrets, and no other faction uses energy turrets. That symbol below energy turrets is the Amarr faction symbol. Then if we look at hybrid turrets in the middle, hybrid turrets are commonly used by Gallente and Caldari, and are not used by Amarr or Minmatar. Now what do I mean when I say used by? I mean that the ships from these factions have bonuses to these types of turrets. So Amarr ships will have bonuses like range bonuses, damage bonuses, capacitor bonuses to energy turrets, whereas they will not have any of those bonuses for hybrid turrets. And sometimes people will still go cross-faction. So there's, for example, a great reason to put projectile turrets on a Punisher. We won't get into that until we maybe get to the Q&A, but if somebody wants to ask me about that during the Q&A, I will tell you more than you care to know. But for the purposes of the way the game is optimized, energy turrets for Amarr, hybrid turrets for Gallente and Caldari, projectile turrets for Minmatar, and only Minmatar use projectile turrets. And then down on the bottom left, we've got drones, and drones are a bit of an exception, where the two factions that use dedicated drone boats, like say a Vexor, the two factions use dedicated drone boats are going to be Amarr and Gallente, but all of the factions use drones. They just generally aren't bonused for drones. So if you're flying a Minmatar battle cruiser, you're probably going to have at least a flight of light drones. It just won't have any bonuses to its damage. And last but not least, missile launchers. So you typically see missile launchers on Caldari and Minmatar ships. Those are the factions that use them the most heavily. I know there are some Amarr ships that have missile launcher slots, but are not bonus for it. I don't remember any that have a bonus for missile launchers. But again, it's one of those things you can fit missile launchers on other types of ships. It's just not very common. Alright, so, clear as mud.
Makes sense, Yuri?
Yeah, pretty much.
Alright, let's talk about turrets first. Turrets are great. So, as with all weapon systems, turrets fit in a high slot. And turrets require a turret hardpoint. So you may have a ship with 8 high slots and only 7 turret hardpoints. And that means you can only fit 7 turrets to that ship. Like a Thrasher. Turrets do instant damage, so there is no travel time. We do not care about the laws of physics with turrets. As soon as you press whatever button it is, F1 or whatever, to turn on your turret, that projectile travels instantaneously to your target, no matter the distance. And turret accuracy, and again, your damage, is affected really by 2 factors, tracking and range. Those are the 2 factors that we care about with turrets. So tracking. Tracking conceptually is how quickly can the turret turn to catch up with a fast-moving target. And you can increase your tracking with modules, rigs, skills, and implants like it says here. And additionally, different types of turrets have different tracking. So we'll come back to that in just a second here. The higher the target's angular velocity, the harder it is to hit. So now we got to talk about like trigonometry and stuff. Bet you didn't know you were going to get into that in this class, but you are. So if a target is traveling directly towards you, like as on approach on a line toward you, their velocity can be 4 km a second, whatever. Their angular velocity relative to you is 0 because they are traveling directly toward you. So that makes them easy to hit. Whereas if they are flying, maybe I would say in English, across your face, or if maybe somewhat differently, if they're flying perpendicular, that's right, to you. That is, they're not flying directly towards you, they're flying across your field of view. They'll have the maximum angular velocity, and that number is going to depend on how fast they're actually traveling. So if somebody's flying directly towards you, you can hit them, usually. If somebody's flying across your face, or you can talk to Bazinga or Clarity about techniques like spiraling in, or otherwise creating angular velocity relative to the target while you approach it. It makes you much harder to hit. And in order to reduce angular velocity, your options are webs, which just reduces velocity across the board, and then smart manual piloting. So if you've got somebody traveling across your face, you can start traveling so that you're flying parallel with them. You're both going in the same direction, and that will greatly reduce the angular velocity that they have relative to you. It's tricky to do. The other major part of tracking here is the smaller the target is, the harder it is to hit. So that's just an Eve convention. It's how it is. If you're in a battleship with battleship-sized guns, you're going to have a hard time hitting frigates. And one thing that you can do to mitigate this is to use a target painter to increase the target's signature radius. So it'll make it a bigger target that's easier to hit. And that's why you see people using target painters on larger ships, but you almost never use a target painter on a small ship because small guns apply really well to small targets. And I'll come back to this, but I'm going to just drop this in here while we're here. Across the board, the bigger your gun is, the worse its tracking will be. And the longer the range of your gun, the worse its tracking will be. So if you've got battleship size artillery, which is a long-range weapon system, battleship size, that has really poor tracking. Whereas if you've got Autocannons on a frigate, that's a really small gun, and it's close range, you have excellent tracking. So one of the major determining factors in whether or not you can hit something is the gun that you're actually firing. Not all ships and guns are created equal. In fact, there's a huge variation in different gun types.
Question.
Go ahead.
How does the decrease in gun tracking compare to the decrease in distance needed to rotate given the increasing range?
Ooh, a tricky question.
I might be able to weigh in on that, Yuri, if you're stuck.
Why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
Yeah, so you're asking about tracking essentially, and I think you're thinking of angular velocity and the fact that if you're far away and your linear velocity is the same, you'll actually have a smaller angular velocity. Is that the question?
Yes, correct. And therefore, you could move, the gun doesn't have to move as far as if you were closer. So even though it rotates slower, how does that relate to the speed to compare basically to this faster rotating gun at closer range having to rotate farther?
Your head's in exactly the right place, Bethany, and I remember you were a scout for one of my fleets, so this is very important for you if you're the scout again. Yeah, if you're close, the angular velocity of you is going to be much greater. So before it even asks the question, before the game asks the question of am I in range to hit, it's have I tracked the target or not? And then you start asking about range. So
I guess the other way to put it in reverse is if someone's very far away and they are in range, like 80 to 100 kilometers, they're basically non-moving, even if they're going very fast. So you don't need a lot of tracking for very far away, and if they're very close, you need a lot of tracking.
And I'll reward a nerdy question with some nerdy trivia if you want it, Bethany. Tracking in the game is measured in milliradians. It's not useful, but it's fun. Sorry, Yuri.
No apology necessary. Yeah, and I think maybe at the base level of your question, there are strategic trade-offs you have to make between short-range guns with high tracking and long-range guns with low tracking. Now, if you know you're going to be fighting at long range, and we'll flip down to the range slide here as a aid for that, then you can't fight with short-range guns. You won't hit anything because you'll be out of range. But on the other hand, if you know that somebody's going to come in and spiral around you at high speed, you may want to even drop down a ship tier. So instead of flying battleships, you might want to fly battle cruisers and fly short-range weapons. So it's one of those situations where you kind of need to know what you're going to be fighting in order to know what will be optimal. Now, the corollary to that, I would say, is if you bring short-range guns and you move really fast, you should be able to catch anybody. Should. Not necessarily true. But you should be able to catch whoever you want to fight and then blast them to pieces and not have to worry about tracking. The reverse is not necessarily true, where it can be harder to maintain range, and I'm bad at that. But some of our other FCs here are quite a bit better than I am at maintaining range and keeping angular velocity low so they can use long-range weapons. Good question. Speaking of range, so turrets got two different kinds of ranges. They've got their optimal range, and they've got their fall-off range. Okay, so optimal does not, and this is get ready to have a headache. Optimal does not reduce your chance to hit, but you are absolutely not guaranteed to hit a target when you are within your optimal range because of tracking. So if you're in optimal range and you can't track the target, you'll still miss. But if you're in optimal range and the target is sitting still, you've got a 100% chance to hit it. Fall off is another chunk of range beyond optimal, and that tells you where, if you've got 1x fall off, so if your fall off is 30 kilometers and your optimal is 10, then at 40 kilometers, optimal plus fall off, you have a 50% chance to hit the target. So the further you get into your fall off, the lower your chance to hit is, and you still have to deal with tracking. So tracking doesn't go away with fall off. Tracking is still a factor. So if their angular velocity is really high and you're at 1x fall off plus optimal, your chance to hit is going to be less than 50%. And we can increase range with modules, rigs, skills, and implants. And as we'll talk about in just a moment here, different weapons have different ranges. So we'll get to that in a second. But for now, we're going to talk a little bit about what some of those support skills are. Let me make sure I'm not missing any questions. Yeah, okay. So skills for turrets. The broad skills that cover all turrets here are controlled burst. Well, that doesn't cover all turrets. I've already misspoken, but that for any turret that requires capacitor, and not all of them do, autocannons and artillery do not. But if it requires capacitor, it gives you an improvement to how much capacitor you use. Gunnery is great. It's just a straight 2% increased rate of fire. So you get 2% DPS, and it's easy to train. Great skill. Motion prediction gives you increased turret tracking, which can be handy, particularly if you're flying long-range turrets. Rapid firing is even better than gunnery. It gives you a 4% increased rate of fire. Sharpshooter gives you increased range. Surgical strike is an expensive skill to train, but gives you just pure damage. And then trajectory analysis, also quite expensive to train, but it gives you improved fall off. And all the skills you start with, except for surgical strike, I think you still don't start with that from the outset, but it's cheap enough that you can get it with the Eve Uni skill book program. Alright, as promised, let's talk about short range versus long range. So you can very broadly categorize turrets into either short range turrets or long range turrets. The short range turrets here on the left are pulse lasers, blasters, and autocannons. And the long range turrets here on the right are beam lasers, railguns, and artillery. So what does that mean? Well, the most obvious thing here is that the optimal and fall off on long range turrets is a lot higher, like a lot higher than the optimal and fall off on short range turrets. But beyond that, what else is different? Well, typically and almost universally, the damage per shot is low on short range turrets, but the damage per second is high. So what does that mean? It means they have a high rate of fire. They shoot a lot of low power projectiles. By contrast, the long range turrets have a high damage per shot and a low damage per second, or lower. So they are relatively slow firing and hit with a much larger impact for each round that they fire, and go through a lot less ammunition. And then short range turrets have high tracking and long range turrets have low tracking. We could say a whole lot more about this particular topic. I'll just offer a couple of thoughts. Let's talk very briefly about suicide ganking, because I think it's a good indicator of why you would use one or the other, even though we don't do any suicide ganking in the uni. So don't go try this out in the field, okay, unless you're not in the uni. So the two types of ships that you'll see suicide gankers using most often, and their objective again is to kill something as quickly as possible before they get blown up. They'll use catalysts, which use blasters. So super high DPS, very short range, great tracking speed. And what they'll use those for is they'll use those just to overwhelm somebody with so much DPS that it kills their ship before Concord kills all the catalysts. Now there's a contrast here, and the other option that they like is tornadoes. Tornadoes use large artillery, so battleship-sized artillery cannons. And the overall DPS and tracking is not very high on those, but you can get enough straight up one-shot damage where if everybody in your fleet hits the F1 button at the same time, you can do enough damage to kill a ship outright before it can repair, turn on its hardeners, or do anything else to try to mitigate that damage. So against ships that are using repairers, Alpha Strike is really strong, and a lot of incursion ships are designed to use repairers and have low buffer. So that'd be a reason to use a high damage per shot, low rate of fire weapon, beyond just the fact that there's range and tracking differences. Yeah, so we got a pair of questions here. Let me skip back up a slide because I missed one. So the parenthesis x2 is the training time multiplier. So x5 is really slow, x1 is really fast to train these skills. And then why can railguns get away with low tracking at long range? Well, that is actually a really good question. So what you want to do with railguns is you want to minimize angular velocity because your tracking is poor. And you can do that by taking advantage of your long range. So like we were saying earlier, if you're at a long range, the angular velocity of your target is lower, just by the laws of physics. If they're traveling 4 km a second and they're 100 km away from you, their angular velocity is relatively low. Whereas if they're traveling 4 km a second and they're across your face at 10 km, their angular velocity is insanely high. So what you want to do with rails is maintain range and take advantage of the range to reduce angular velocity. And additionally, if your FC is good, like if you're flying Feroxes, they will also fly you parallel to your target so that you can track them more easily. Does that actually answer the question? I'm going to go with yes. I think that was a great answer. Nice job, Yuri. Alright, let's talk about energy turrets. Short range or pulse lasers, long range or beam lasers. They use a lot of capacitors, so most of Mars ships, because these are MR turrets, most of Mars ships have got extra strong capacitors so that they can support the capacitor usage of pulse or beam lasers. They've got good optimal and very short fall off, so you're generally going to be shooting within optimal and not spending a whole lot of time worrying about your fall off. And they use crystals. The crystals, the second bullet here is probably the most important one. They only do EM and thermal damage. So there are no kinetic or explosive damage crystals. The main difference between crystals is that they have different ranges. And the longer the range, the worse the damage, almost across the board, with the exception of T2 crystals, which we may have a chance to talk about here in a few. And cool thing about crystals, not only do they last a long time, so T1 crystals last forever, and faction or T2 crystals last for a very long time, lots of shots. You can also instantly reload. So if you're firing at long range and your target comes in and joins you at short range, you can switch to short range ammo to do more damage. Although hopefully you've got enough tracking to hit them at short range when they come in. Talk about ammunition here. This is the T1 ammunition. at the shortest range, we've got multi-frequency, and the longest we've got radio. And this, I don't like the way this cap need column is set up. This is the bonus to capacitor needed. So like standard uses almost 50% less capacitor than multi-frequency, but they all use capacitor. You see total damage decreases as range increases, and the EM and thermal damage step down at a similar way to the total damage, except radio doesn't do any thermal damage at all. So if you want to snipe somebody, you want radio. If you want to melt their face at close range, you want multi-frequency. If you want to be somewhere in between, you can put another crystal in. I usually will build my MR boats with radio, standard, and multi-frequency, because you can switch ammo instantly. So it makes a lot of sense to at least be able to swap based on range. So that's crystals right there. Very cool, right? About hybrid turrets. Now again, these are Galente and Caldari weapons. Short range version is blasters, and the long range is railguns. And if you get to be a really good scout, one of the things you'll be able to do is look at your target, and you can see these top two are railguns, and these bottom two in the image are blasters. So you can get an idea of what kind of weapons your target is equipped with by using look at ship. And that's a really valuable skill. It's some advanced stuff. So hybrid turrets use a little bit of capacitor. If you are capped out, you can't fire them, same as energy turrets. But they don't use as much capacitor as energy turrets. And they've got the middle of the road for optimal and fall off. The ammunition has multiple effects. It's a lot like energy ammunition, where it affects the damage, range, and capacitor use. But instead of doing EM and thermal damage, it does kinetic and thermal. And we say these are damage locked, so it only does kinetic and thermal damage for any ammunition that you put into a hybrid turret. They have a 5-second reload. So you can switch ammo, but unlike with energy turrets, you need to plan in 5 seconds of not being able to shoot if you want to switch from, let's say, lead to antimatter. You've got a 5-second reload time there. And here's the chart of different ammo types. Again, we've got antimatter as short range, high capacitor, high damage. We've got iron down there as long range, medium, well, moderate capacitor, low damage. And then right in the middle you've got lead, which is no bonus to range or penalty, and lowest capacitor usage. So what you want to load kind of depends here. But I pretty much always bring antimatter, so in case somebody tries to brawl me. And then I'll usually bring one long range ammo, usually iron or tungsten. And the biggest deciding factor there is actually what is my targeting range on my boat. Because if I have iron that can shoot out to 100 kilometers, but I can only target out to 80, then there's no point in having ammunition that shoots past 80 kilometers. Might as well put iridium in there, which is going to shoot more like 80 kilometers and fly that way. But I'm not as inclined with hybrid ammo because of the reload time. I'm not as inclined to be swapping ammos every 10 kilometers as a target approaches. Alright, so we got a question here. I've heard that missiles are generally better on Caldari and that using guns on Caldari ships is suboptimal. Is it true or is it just crazy? Yeah, that's not really true. The Caldari blaster boats, hybrid turret boats, excuse me, can be very competitive. Feroxes in particular are the one we use the most in the uni. They use railguns. There's a small bias in the game where Gallente hybrid boats typically do more damage because they have more bonuses to damage, whereas a lot of the Caldari hybrid ships have bonuses to range. So if you want to fight at longer range, and that's particularly relevant with systems like railguns, then a Caldari ship is usually going to be a better bet. Whereas if you want to do maximum face melting close range DPS with blasters, you're probably going to want a Gallente boat. Those are broad generalizations. They don't hold true for every case, but that's sort of where we're at with those different types of ships. Does that answer the question? All right, we'll go with yes. Projectile turrets. I love projectile turrets. They're great. So short-range projectile turrets are autocannons, long-range artillery. They do not require any capacitor at all. So if your capacitor is out, you can continue to fire autocannons and artillery. And they're the third option here. So energy turrets have high optimal, low fall-off. Hybrid turrets have middling for each. Projectile turrets have low optimal and high fall-off range. And the ammunition is absurdly complicated. It can affect optimal range, tracking, and damage type. So unlike the other two, which are locked in as energy turrets to EM thermal and as hybrid turrets to kinetic thermal, projectile turrets do all different weird kinds of damage, usually explosive, but not always. And the mix and match of range options is really complicated too. They do have a 10-second reload time. So you generally are not going to want to casually be switching ammo constantly with projectile turrets. You're generally going to want to pick a type of ammo and try to stick to it until you have to change because of the longer reload time. And I think we'll get to this, but I'm going to set this out here now that we've looked at all the different types. Hybrid turrets, and particularly blasters, generally have the highest damage. If you looked at the charts, lasers and projectile turrets have lower damage. So that's a broad trend overall. That's something worth considering. If you want to do max deeps, you want blasters, not autocannons and not pulse lasers, for example. If you want max alpha, you want artillery. So there's a whole bunch of considerations there that we probably won't get into today, because we've got stuff like this to look at. What a mess. So here's the 8 different kinds of projectile turret ammos, and it's all over the place. Crazy Mimitar people, always up to mischief. So we've got 3 different categories here. We've got the short range, we've got the medium range high tracking, and then we've got the long range. Short range does the most damage, long range does the least. And within this, you can see, like I really like phase plasma, because phase plasma does thermal and kinetic damage, which is a lot like hybrid turrets. But if you know that you're going to go up against somebody who's got a weakness to EM damage, you can fire EMP instead. And that's going to do a lot of EM damage and a little bit of kinetic and explosive. So there's all kinds of calculus that you can do here, which probably is not worth your time overall. The medium range tracking ammos can be very practical if you're using artillery and you're trying to shoot small targets, because you've got a bonus to tracking. So and it's not that easy to get bonuses to tracking. Particularly, this is, I think, the only ammo that provides a tracking bonus. So I usually carry, I like depleted uranium. but titanium saboment's okay too. But I like depleted uranium. Sounds cool. And then for long range, you've got proton, nuclear, and carbonized lead. And they've got different damage balances here. I usually bring lead, but not for any particular reason. So for a low damage long range option, you've got some ammo there that you can choose. Yeah, we have not mentioned T2 ammo yet, and we will talk about T2 ammo further on down the line because it is important. I kind of wish it was on these charts here, but it is not. Ooh, change of pace. Whoa, missiles. How about it? So missiles work real different from turrets. They do a completely different kind of thing. And again, the most common missile boats are going to be either Minmatar or Caldari. But you do see sometimes Amar ships have a lot of missile hardpoints. They just typically won't have good bonuses for them. So some of the drone boats, for example, will carry missiles instead of energy turrets. Now, as with turrets, you need a high slot, but you need a launcher hardpoint rather than a turret hardpoint. So a ship can have, like for example, 7 turret hardpoints and 1 launcher hardpoint. That means you're allowed to load 7 turrets and 1 missile launcher to that ship. And most ships are heavily stacked one way or the other. There's a few that have a mixture, like 3 and 3, but most ships will either have more turret hardpoints or more launcher hardpoints. Missiles don't require capacitor at all. Completely capacitor-free weapon system. You can continue to fire them when your capacitor is out. One of the downsides of missiles is that they need to travel to the target. So when you shoot a missile, it actually creates a little object in space, a little missile object in space, and it goes flying out to hit your target. And that missile can be blown up. So you can't target it, but you can kill it with, for example, smart bombs is the most common thing, where you can use a smart bomb and just blow up the missile while it's traveling, and then it doesn't do any damage at all. So that's advanced techniques. It also means that when you turn on your missile launchers, you have to wait for the target to get hit and blowed up. And if you're at long range, it can be a long wait. So if they're shooting projectiles at you and you're shooting missiles at them, they may actually kill you before you kill them. And then you both die. A rare occurrence, but a possibility. And missiles always hit. So there's no optimal, there's no fall off, there's no tracking. But there are other mechanics that we'll talk about. The range is calculated by multiplying the flight time and the velocity. So how fast is it going and how long is it going to fly for? It's, again, physics, right? And it says here, and this is extremely important, damage may not be applied fully to smaller, faster ships. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here with our missile chart. What does that mean? Each size category of ship has a long range and a short range missile option, and then we'll get to rapid launchers too. So ammunition for missile launchers is all it does is change the damage type. Well, I say that T2 ammo does higher damage or has more applications, so T2 ammo is more complicated. But the T1 ammo for missiles, you can choose whatever damage type you want. So you can have explosive, thermal, kinetic, EM. Each of those has got its own missile type. Most ships are bonused for all types of missile damage, but some Caldari ships in particular are only bonused for kinetic missiles, Scourge missiles, and stealth bombers are only bonused for the type of missile that aligns with their faction's usual damage type. So for example, a Minmatar Hound is bonused for explosive damage and not any other type of damage. Yeah, here we got a question that we'll get to in just a second, so hold that thought. So we've got long-range missiles. The small long-range missiles are light missiles. The medium long-range missiles are heavy missiles, and the large long-range missiles are cruise missiles. And then the short-range small missiles are rockets. Short-range medium missiles are heavy assault missiles, or HAMs, lol. And then the long-range or short-range missiles are torpedoes. Now, what about rapid lights? Well, so rapid launchers are very cool. You mount them to one size category larger than the ammunition indicated on this chart. I'll get to what that means in a second. But what they do is they have a very high rate of fire, and they run out of ammo quickly, and they've got a very long reload time. So they do burst damage, we would say. They do a lot of damage up front, and then you hit reload, and you're kind of just sitting there waiting for half a minute. So let's talk about a specific one. Let's talk about rapid light missiles, which we use on caracals. A caracal is a cruiser, and cruisers usually use medium-sized weapons. They usually use heavy missiles or heavy assault missiles, per this chart. But you can also fit a rapid light missile launcher, and those light missiles have all the advantages of light missiles as usual. So they have high speed, and they've got strong application against small targets. Their explosion velocity is high, as well as their velocity. So they're good. Or sorry, they have small explosion radius and high explosion velocity. So they are good at hitting small targets. Whereas heavy missiles, also long range, also go on caracals. You can put heavy missiles on caracals, but they do not have the strong application to small targets. And overall, the DPS on a rapid light launcher is higher than the DPS on a heavy missile launcher. You get more damage out of a rapid launcher until you hit reload, and then you get 0 damage out of your rapid light missile launcher.
I have a quick interjection for missiles specifically in terms of application.
Please.
In addition to target painters, they benefit heavily from webs.
Yeah. Let's see. I've got. I don't think I get into that here, but we'll digress just a little bit. So to your point, there are two factors that affect missile application. There's explosion radius and explosion velocity. So explosion velocity is headache stuff, really. But how fast the missile's explosion travels. So if you've got a ship traveling 4 kilometers a second and your missile's explosion velocity is only 100 meters a second, when that missile explodes, the ship has already flown out of the missile's explosion, which is bad. So the long-range missiles tend to have worse explosion velocity, but more importantly, the larger missiles tend to have worse explosion velocity. And then there's an explosion radius. So how big is the explosion? And if the explosion radius is bigger than the ship that you've hit, it only takes partial damage. So if any of you have played, like tabletop games where you've got blast templates, you say this guy's under the blast template of the explosion of the missile, but it only takes partial damage because some of that damage is just getting wasted blowing up in empty space. That hopefully has given you all a headache because it's really complicated. There's one I think really notable exception here as well, and that is stealth bombers fire torpedoes. So stealth bombers are frigates. They fire torpedoes, which are large weapon systems, and they fire them at medium to long range. So why are stealth bombers so good? Well, they use a high damage weapon system from a large ship, and they have a lot of range. Makes them very strong for the amount you pay for them. That is a shameless plug for my stealth bomber fleet next weekend.
Is it on a Saturday or a Sunday?
I think I left it on Sunday. I couldn't do Saturday.
I
I'm
won't be
sorry
able to
about
come.
it.
Yeah, no, you're fine, Yuri. I miss out on all the fun stuff.
No, I'll get one on Saturday eventually. I was going to be Saturday this time, and then we had something come up. So it is on my to-do list. Keep holding out. Be strong.
I have 8 hounds in stack.
Nice. Stealth bombers are awesome, yo. Tons of damage, cheap, blow up pretty much as soon as anything shoots them. Very fun. So let's look at missile support skills. Missile launcher operation gives you a rate of fire bonus, which is cool. Rapid launch gives you another rate of fire bonus. Warhead upgrades is a hard train, a long train, but it gives you additional damage. Bombardment increases flight time. Bombardment is really important, as is projection. And if your missiles do less damage, like if you don't train up launcher operation, rapid launcher, or weapon upgrades, that's, it's annoying. But if your missiles don't have enough travel time, they'll just die in space without hitting your target. And that's where a lot of us struggle with rapid light missile caracals, is that people with newer characters don't have missile bombardment and missile projection, and so their missile range is really short. And when we get in a fight, they end up missing completely, doing 0 DPS because they're out of range. So something to think about. If you were to prioritize, I would prioritize bombardment and projection over the DPS skills, just so you can get your range out there. Target navigation prediction, that's reduces the impact of the target's velocity. So that has to do with missile explosion velocity. And then guided missile precision reduces the impact of the target's sig radius. So that has to do with the explosion radius of the missile. Both useful. I would say they're the third thing to work on, though, for missiles. Unless you know that you're going to be flying a lot of torpedoes and shooting Ishtars or something obscure like that. Which is not really the right way to do things. I'm shaking my fist at some of the other FCs. Don't do it. Shoot marauders with stealth bombers. That's the right way to do things.
Or pause bash.
Ew. Yeah, that's fun content, right?
Got evicted by a fleet of smart bombers once. That was not a good time.
Yeah, you can do a lot with them. They're yeah. All right, let's keep rolling here. T2 turrets and launchers. So once you've got your basic turret skill to 5, so you've got hybrid turrets 5, you can get a specialization skill, and it'll either be blasters specialization or railgun specialization, for example, for hybrids. So the short range and long range have different specialization skills. And this gives you access to what we call T2 weapons. T2 weapons have got higher DPS, always. They are harder to fit, so they require better fitting skills. Sometimes they're cheaper than the top tier meta weapons. Sometimes they're more expensive. It varies from weapon to weapon. And then they may have better range and tracking. Typically, they're just better across the board. T2 weapons also allow, and this is extremely important, the use of T2 ammunition. Oh! T2 ammunition is cheaper than T1 faction ammo, which is what most of you will be loading. Like usually if you're flying blasters and you're a younger character, you'll be using Federation Navy antimatter or Caldari Navy antimatter, for example, rather than just antimatter 1. So when you get the ability to load Void or Null, those ammos are actually cheaper than faction ammo, which is cool. And they have specialized options. So usually...
Void is also even shorter range, and that's important to remember for blasters.
Yes. You got to be sitting on top of your target for Void. So typically, this is a very broad statement here. Typically, the short range weapons will have one very short range ammunition that does higher DPS, but has very poor range and sometimes poor tracking or application. And then they'll typically have a long range ammo, which does more damage than the usual long range ammo, the T1 long range ammo that is, but often is well, in some cases it's got better tracking, in others it's got worse. So but it gives you a higher damage long range ammo option. Particularly Scorch for pulse lasers is fantastic. Just great range, great damage. And then the long range weapons generally are going to have a very long range ammo, very long range ammo that does a lot more damage than the T1 long range ammo. And then sometimes they'll have an application, although there will be another type of ammo, and typically that's an application ammo. So to help you hit targets that are difficult to hit. That's a very broad set of statements, though. It gets a lot more complicated than that when you actually look at the individual T2 ammos. But yeah, T2 is a cost-effective way, like it says here, for high-SP pilots to increase their damage output. You should train into T2. It's good. Drones. Alright, let's talk about drones. So drones, the way they work mechanically is they have turrets on them. And they fly around, but they have optimal and fall off and tracking. And the non-sentry drones fly out to their target, so they actually have micro warp drives. They turn on their micro warp drive, they fly out to their target, they turn off their micro warp drive, and they start shooting. Most drones deal a single damage type
Quick
based on their
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are drones micro warp drives disrupted by the same sorts of things that would disrupt a player's micro warp drive?
So my understanding, and I haven't ever tried this, but you can scram drones if I'm not mistaken.
You can.
Yeah, you can scram them down.
You're usually better off in a PvP situation webbing them, though, and keeping point on your target.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I suppose, I haven't tried this out, but ESS, where you can't use a micro warp drive, your drones have to fly in at slow speed rather than flying in at micro warp drive speed. I would assume because of the mechanic. So that's a good question. Yeah. We've got damage types here. Drones, most drones that you're going to use are going to deal one damage type based on their faction. So a Hobgoblin 2 is a Galente drone and it deals thermal damage, for example. You can target drones, you can lock them up, you can use E-War on them, and you can shoot them. A common thing to do is to defang a target, which means to kill all its drones. So if you've got a big target that is going to take you a long time to kill, you want to kill off all the drones, and then it can't do any damage to you, assuming it's a drone boat, something like a Dominix. You have to have a drone bay to carry the drones, so that's just where you store them. And then you have to have bandwidth to launch and control drones. So you might have a ship with 75, meters cubed? I think that's right. Drone bay,
Yeah.
which will let you bring 3 flights of light drones, or a flight of mediums and a flight of lights, or some other combination. But if you only have 25 megabits of drone bandwidth, you'll only be able to launch the 5 light drones. So you won't be able to launch all 75 meters cubed worth of drones. You'll just be able to launch a small subset of them because your computer is not strong enough. Then we've got, as with everything in EVE, there's always an exception to the rule. Down at the bottom here, we've got sentry drones. So when you launch sentry drones, they just sit there. They don't micro warp drive around, they don't fly to targets, and they act as turrets sitting there in space. So they're great if you're far away from something. They're not very good if you're close to it. But they only come in the largest tier of drones. So let's hop down here. So we've got light, medium, heavy, and sentry drones are the same size as heavy drones. So there's no light sentry drones. There's only essentially heavy sentry drones. Now, what we're seeing here is another complicated chart. But the factions on the left give you which factions drones we're looking at. So, for example, Galente light drones at the top left are hobgoblins, whereas Mimitar light drones are warriors. So this is just the name of the drones. And then on the right side, see what the drones are good at. You see their damage type, but more importantly, at that top right, that minus 30% speed and tracking. What that means is that hobgoblins are slower and have poorer tracking than warriors. However, they do more damage. So, your paper damage is going to be better with hobgoblins, always, because they have higher damage that they're shooting than warriors. And the same is true for ogres versus berserkers. An ogre has got higher paper DPS than a berserker. But the catch there is, particularly with the larger sizes of drones, like an ogre is going to have a hard time catching smaller targets. So you've got our recommendations down here on the bottom of what to use your drones against. And light drones are usually used against frigates and destroyers, medium drones against cruisers and battle cruisers, and heavy drones against battleships. You might have some luck sending a berserker against a battle cruiser, whereas you probably won't have any luck sending an ogre against a battle cruiser. So if you're taking that step down, you're really going to struggle. And then it depends. Oh, okay, well, what if you web the battle cruiser and target painted it? Well, that's okay. It gets complicated. Or a hammerhead is going to be a better choice against battleships than a Valkyrie, because a hammerhead does more damage, and the speed and tracking of a hammerhead against a battleship is not really going to matter. That penalty is not going to matter very much. Alright, got a cool question here. If application fall-off damage or turret tracking decreases damage a greater amount against smaller, typically faster targets. So they're really independent factors, the fall-off and the tracking, and both of them. Well, I shouldn't say that. Fall-off, it doesn't care about the size of the target. So, if go ahead.
Application fall off. Missiles. So missiles. I posted this a while ago. Missiles have a decrease in application against smaller targets,
Correct.
and large turrets have difficulty tracking smaller targets.
Also true. Yeah.
So my question is, which one of those causes a greater difficulty in killing your opponent?
I can actually give you an answer that isn't just it depends for that one. If you want to kill a small target with a big ship, your best bet is to go with a rapid missile launcher. Just across the board. So either rapid lights if you're in cruisers or rapid heavies if you're in battleships. You will get good application against smaller targets and high DPS. It's anybody who wants to disagree is welcome to disagree, but I'm going to say that now, that it's a better choice than any type of turret. Now beyond that, there's a lot of math to be done when you start getting into the turrets. But I would say if you're going to fight something smaller than you, usually the best option is going to be T2 pulse lasers with Scorch. Scorch is long range, medium damage, good tracking. So that would be like the turret that I would take up against small stuff. If I know it's going to be really close to me, then I might consider autocannons or blasters. But unless I can guarantee that my target is going to be far away, I would go with a short-range turret system. But again, rapid missiles are going to be better, and the non-rapid missile options are generally going to be worse than short-range turrets. Even the short-range missiles struggle. Like heavy assault missiles are bad against frigates, whereas rapid light missiles are fantastic against frigates.
Oh, you're underselling that. Like, hams against frigates is an abysmal experience. You need to run at least 2 target painters most of the time.
Yeah, it's really not good.
You can get away with 1 if you're running like faction ammo specifically, but no. Hams and frigates are not a fun time.
Yeah. So I flew a battleship fleet last night, and I got my butt solidly kicked by a well-timed boosh. Now, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, right? But I flew rapid heavy missiles on battleships because I wanted to be able to punch down to smaller targets and still do good DPS. So Praxis is bonus for every weapon type, battleship weapon type. And I chose rapid heavies because I think they're the most versatile of all the weapon types across the board. That's a political statement. People get agitated
I'd
about
say
stuff like
drones are the most versatile weapon system in the game, but okay.
that. Nah, that's a fair point, isn't it? I could have gotten drone boats.
I mean, especially since you're bonused for them in a Praxi.
Yeah, Praxis has got drone bonus.
It has an everything bonus.
Yes.
I think I forgot
Except
to scoop
tank.
my MTU.
So, follow-up question on what you just mentioned. It seems like there is this very long-standing debate of which is better, drones or missiles. So, why would someone ever not fly those, considering they seem to be almost universally considered the best?
Well, two-part answer. For PvE, player versus environment content, you probably really do want to go with drones. And the best reason to go with drones for PvE is that they don't require a capacitor and they never run out of ammo. So, and you can kind of leave them to do their thing. If you set auto aggression on, well, you really shouldn't. You really pay attention to your ships. Be active when you rat. But drones are, I would say, just across the board better for PvE. The only thing that can compete with them is auto-targeting missiles, which people will use sometimes because you don't have to lock a target. You can just launch missiles and indiscriminately destroy anything that's near you. For PvP, a lot of disadvantages to drones. The most notable is that they can be killed. So if somebody's got smart bombs, in particular, like a smart bomb on their ship, they can wipe out your entire flight of drones, and you don't have any drones left. Or if you warp out and your drones were still fighting, and you leave your drones behind, then you don't have any drones left. You lose all your drones. You don't have that problem with missiles. And then the other factor is that you want to use light drones against small targets. And typically a system like rapid light missiles is going to do more burst damage against a small target than a flight of light drones.
Okay, sorry, I think my question was unclear. Given there's this whole debate over missiles versus drones, why would someone ever use turrets?
Oh, yeah. That's an excellent
That
question.
was what I was trying to say.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm answering the wrong question. Yeah, so, okay, we'll talk a little bit of theory here. Y'all are going to get a little more content than maybe you bargained for. If you want raw damage, short-range turrets, and in particular blasters, are your best choice. So if you know that you're going to fight battleships with battleships and you're going to be face to face within 10 km of each other, you want blaster megathrons, and that's going to do the maximum amount of damage. But unfortunately, that's paper damage because it doesn't necessarily apply to anything smaller, right? So, it's very situational. The other major reason to use long-range weapons, in particular, is if you can fight at long range. Missiles have a long travel time, as do drones. Drones, in particular, have a really long travel time. So you've got to wait to get your damage onto the target. And they have more time to catch reps, warp out, whatever. Whereas if you're using turrets with the instant damage application and potentially higher DPS at long range, you can apply that damage
get higher
instantly.
alpha at long range with turrets over missiles. The
Yeah.
alpha's way higher.
Yeah, especially artillery, but even rails. Yeah.
I think the core answer to why use turrets over missiles or drones is missiles and drones are very much a kind of they can do everything, but they're not the best at it. You can target resistance holes with missiles very, very well, but there are other ways to target resistance holes that will get you higher damage in certain scenarios. And the reason why missiles and drones are especially favored in PvE content is because it's not as critical to have the absolute highest possible numbers. Whereas when you're looking at PvP, if you're going back to the earlier suicide ganking example, if you're suicide ganking and you're going for a high alpha suicide gank with arty ships, you're doing it because you want the highest possible alpha, because you want to ensure your target dies before you do. Which, with missiles, you will have a lower alpha, and you will have travel time.
Yeah.
Also, the ammo for missiles is, generally speaking, way more expensive, which can be a factor for newer players especially.
Yeah, but it's a good philosophical question, and one that we have debated at great length in various forums. What I will add to that, thank you for elaborating, is that I love blasters. Personally, Yuri, I love blasters and I love brawling. So if I want to, yeah, right? That's the fun times. And blasters do much more damage than missiles or drones, if you can get on top of your target.
Sorry, Yuri, did you say you love brawling? Is that right?
Yeah, you may not have been aware of that, but
no.
yeah, no idea, right? that's a FC team joke. I'm notorious for brawling with doctrines that are not for brawling.
So what you're saying is I need to give you a Daredevil. That's what you're saying.
How about Blaster Megatron?
How about a Blaster Daredevil?
Okay, I'll accept that.
What's a daredevil?
One of the best brawler frigates in the game.
It's a pirate faction ship. It's very
Also,
cool.
also uses autocannons, right?
Blasters.
Oh, I was thinking of the Dramiel, sorry.
Yeah, Dramiel's the autocannon boy. They pair very well together.
Let's talk a little bit about specialized weapon systems. Let's see if I have any questions here I need to answer. Yeah, so smart bombs. We talked a bit about smart bombs. Smart bombs are what we call area of effect weapons that do damage to everything around your ship. And probably most of you in here, except for those of you who are very new, have experienced smart bombs the hard way, where somebody will sit typically a Praxis on a gate and wait for you to fly in your nice little frigate or whatever, and then activate all their smart bombs, and as soon as you land, you explode. They don't target you or anything like that. They just damage everything around them, and that includes you. And then they kill your pod, and you get sent back to where you came from. But smart bombs have got lots of uses. They're not great for like fighting another fleet. It's not really an optimal use of smart bombs. But they are great for destroying drones. So putting a smart bomb or two on a battleship will let you blow up the drones that come to attack you, and that's really nice. And they also are good for, if you're really talented, blowing up missiles. So if you've got missiles or bombs incoming, and we'll talk about bombs in half a second, you can blow those up with smart bombs and not get hit by them. So that's cool. Bombs are launched by stealth bombers, and they have a large explosion radius. They have a fixed travel distance before they explode, and they do a lot of damage, particularly to larger targets. So they're kind of like missiles, but they have an area of effect rather than being targeted at something.
What is the difference between bombs and those torpedo stealth bombers? Or are those the same?
Same kind of bombers. So you're spot on. The same ships are stealth bombers use bombs and torpedoes. Torpedoes I use for actually killing large targets because you have sustained damage with torpedoes, whereas bombs are good for blowing up drones or small targets. Or if you've got a
Bombs
lot
are
of
also
them,
a very effective tool for like high skill fleet combat, like warping into a bomb point, dropping your bombs, warping out. It can absolutely ruin people.
they require a lot more coordination than torpedoes. Because torpedoes are just like any other missile launcher, whereas bombs, they have a fixed travel distance of 30 km. They blow each other up. So if you launch more than 7 bombs, all the bombs will blow each other up, and they won't do nearly as much damage. You can't use mixed bomb types. You have to use the same bomb type, etc., etc. It gets complicated. The bombing runs are very cool. And I do occasionally use bombs on my stealth bomber fleets, but I usually focus on torpedoes. Oh, Vorton projectors. To me, this is new stuff. They're only for Edencom ships. They fire this chain lightning thing, which hits whatever you're shooting at, and then bounces around to other targets close to that target. They deal EM and kinetic damage. In practice, they are not really great for PvP unless you're fighting something like a Tristan fleet where you know that there's going to be a lot of small targets that you can bounce around at. But they are very nice against certain types of PvE content where you have lots of targets at a range and you can just nuke them off the field with chain lightning. But they're not commonly used really across the board. By contrast, we've got disintegrators. Ooh, disintegrators are cool. So they use turret mechanics. They have optimal and fall off, but they fire a constant beam, and the longer the beam is on, the more damage it does. So you start out with a low damage, and then it spools up to high overall damage, and they can be extremely dangerous. This is, I think, for each tier of weapon, if you look at what does the most damage per second, a fully spooled up disintegrator is pretty much always at the top. Maybe some competition from blasters. And they deal thermal and explosive damage. So, very useful weapon system. They also tend to have unusually good tracking. So like a medium disintegrator is going to fare a lot better against frigates than like a medium artillery cannon. Alright, a little bit of ammo talk, and then we're getting to the end of the class here, and you all can go get on this PvP fleet, right? Ammo! I've talked about this already, but I'll revisit it. Carrying multiple ammunition types gives flexibility, usually for range is the main reason to carry different ammunition types. Sometimes also, like with missiles, you want to be able to shoot into your opponent's resistance hole, so you may want a different type of missile to apply better to their weakest resistance. That's can be hard to apply on the uniscale, where typically we're roaming and shooting whoever we can find. But on a Sovnol war scale, if you know your opponent, or for that matter, if you're on a strategic operations scale, people know we're going to bring Feroxes for strategic operations. So they know they want to shoot into the Ferox's hole, which I think is actually kinetic damage, believe it or not. Usually it would be EM because it's a shield boat, but we have EM resist bonuses. T1 ammo reduces expenses in PvE and also for bashes. So, and drones also, as mentioned, reduce ammo costs because drones don't run out of ammo. So if you're just out there, shooting rats, you might want to use T1 ammo and not worry about the extra 10% damage you get out of faction ammo. And similarly, if you're going to shoot a structure for 20 minutes, you probably want to use T1 ammo because you're going to hit the damage cap anyway.
Question on drone cost. So while we while drones don't cost ammo to fire, you can lose the drones, meaning you have to rebuy them. How does that typically stack up against ammo cost?
I mean, if you're good at pulling your drones, it's a non-issue. You can usually avoid your drones dying.
Most NPCs don't shoot drones, so in PvE, unless you have to warp off and leave your drones behind, you usually won't lose your drones. PvP is a whole other matter, where smart bombs or specifically targeting your drones, things that people will definitely do, and and then you can lose all your drones. And if you lose all your drones, then you're useless. You're paperweight. You can't shoot at all. So that's bad. In most PvP cases where we're using drones, and we don't really use drones a whole lot for PvP except for Tristan's, but in most cases we're going into situations where we know we're not going to lose those drones. So the expense ends up being cheaper overall than using ammo. The exception being T1 ammo, and particularly T1 crystals, because T1 crystals are infinite ammo. They never expire. Pirate faction ammo. Yeah, don't buy pirate faction ammo. It ain't worth the money. Alright, I'm going to hop ahead, but we can scoot back to wherever we need to go. Here is our little chart we started out with here. And could I have somebody link the class feedback form in both Classroom Bravo and in Mumble for me? So I'm going to stick around and take questions, but there is a fleet going on, a PvP fleet going on in Delta right now. No hard feelings if you want to go jump in on that rather than hang out and chat with Old Man Yuri.
So I actually have a question about two specific types of play styles. How common is it that someone will either build around like it's unlikely that I'm gonna hit you, but I only need to hit you once, or alternatively, like it's not very likely I'm gonna hit you with the first couple, but I'm gonna just bury you in bullets until something hits.
I don't really see either of those used commonly, with the exception of, in the latter case, Minmatar ships shooting in their fall off. So like autocannons in particular, if you load autocannons up, they have very, very poor optimal range and a lot of fall off range. So people will actually extend the fall off range of their autocannons using rigs or computers or whatever, and say, I'm going to accept that I'm only going to have a 75% chance to hit, but just, again, like you said, through sheer volume of fire, I'm going to hit you enough to kill you. So that is really only applies for autocannons. Like, it's not very common for hybrids. Hybrids, you typically do want to be pretty close to your optimal range, and then energy turrets don't have very much fall off anyway. So you either hit or you don't, basically. For the former case, I'm trying to think about it. I mean, maybe artillery, but I think everybody who's trying to do like an alpha strike is trying to actually hit. So they're not trying to sit in that 50% hit range at fall off. They want to be in optimal. I haven't really seen that done very much. But Loans, if you've got wisdom there, you're welcome to share.
Sorry, I actually missed the question there. What was that?
Yeah, do you know anybody, and let me make sure I'm saying this right, correct me if I'm wrong, who fits with the assumption that they're not going to hit very often, but they are going to hit very hard when they do? Or, second question was, what about if you are not going to hit at a high percentage rate, but you're just going to fire so many rounds that you're going to get an overall high level of DPS even though you miss a lot? I said for the latter, autocannons. But for the former, I don't really know of anybody who does that.
No. I mean, generally, your kind of guiding principle when putting a fit and getting guns on it is that you want to maximize your damage output. So, yeah, you need to factor in that you should be hitting often. Your max output. There's no point fitting a gun that's going to hit once every 10 shots, because chances are you're either flying the wrong ship for the job or you've come up against a target you're never going to hit properly anyway. So, yeah, it's not something I've ever heard of, no.
Other questions? The floor is open. I'm going to ask a question myself. Oh, go ahead.
So, for beginners, it obviously seems like it would be great to have a number of weapon systems trained for various purposes. I mean, we've mentioned drones, missiles, and how there is a ton of fun to be had with turrets and PvP. As a beginner, how do you figure out where to start with that?
Ooh. We'll have to take a couple different answers on that one, but I'll give you my answer. My answer is I like T2 light missiles as maybe the first weapon system that you take to T2, because that gives you the option of flying light missiles on frigates and destroyers, but also the option of flying rapid light caracals with T2 missiles, or just generally with missiles if you don't have time to train the T2 skills. So that's part one of the answer. Then I recommend people train into Amar frigates. So retributions, which use lasers, and purifiers, which are stealth bombers, and maledictions, which are tackle, so interceptors, and then maybe deacons for repairs. But those are all ships that we use heavily in our core uni doctrines, and so you can train the other racial frigates up, but you'll usually Mimitar is the only one that can really compete, where they've got a good interceptor, an okay option for assault frigates. They don't have a repair option for what we do, and they've got a perfectly respectable stealth bomber. So Mimitar is almost as good, but I prefer telling people to go Amar because it gives you ship to fly in several of our different doctrines. That is like ideal. Now this is PvP. PvE is a whole different question, which I'm probably not going to give you a very useful answer about, to be honest. Does that help at all?
Somewhat. So on that PvE side, obviously you do need income to supplement your PvP for the most part.
It's true. Yeah. I like exploration for income, and I like incursions for income. And you're welcome to drop me a line and ask questions about either of those. Incursions are high income and relatively easy to get into with the uni. Home fronts are also really good if you can find a solid crew of people to run home fronts with in terms of low investment to high ISK per hour. A little boring, but that's a different matter. And then you can do drone ratting if you don't want to hang out with anybody else. That would be another good option. You can hunt clone troopers. I like hunting clone troopers. There's all kinds of PvE stuff to do. I don't do nearly as much PvE as I used to. I mostly just do incursions now. Good questions. Keep me on my toes.
So one thing I've seen some people say is you never want to mix damage ranges. Like you don't want to go auto cannons and arties. Is that like a hard and fast rule, or are there situations where you might want to do that?
Ooh, there's a good question. I like that question. Yeah, so you will across fittings, almost never, if ever, see people mixing and matching turrets of different, short range versus long range turrets across a boat. It's pretty much always going to be universally one or the other. If you want combined arms like that, which you will see, is, and this is very rare for the uni because we are a new player friendly corp, and so we tend to fly doctrines that are simpler to fly, which means people anchor up and follow the FC around and take simple instructions. But if you fly with like an elite group of people who really know what they're doing, a lot of the time they'll use combined arms, where they'll have some long-range ships, like stealth bombers, and some short-range ships, like assault frigates with autocannons or blasters or lasers. And they'll use that combined arms to take on targets of different sizes. So you won't see it on one individual ship, but across the fleet, you'll see, hey, we've got 4 retributions with pulse lasers, and we've got 4 purifiers with torpedo launchers, so that we've got a mixture of long and short range. Yeah, but on a single ship, it's extremely uncommon, if not unheard of. One of the main reasons there is that you can't group guns of different sizes. So if you want to have all your guns on F1 and volley things, you've got to have all the same gun or missile launcher. Well, we've been going for about 90 minutes. Just a moment here, I'm going to shut down the stream. I will post this class either to YouTube or Twitch, or maybe both, so that you all can review it and enjoy my words of wisdom one more time over. Thank you very much for attending. I really appreciate you all being here. And if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to me, particularly on Discord is the easiest place to find me. I'm just Yuri Levnik on Discord, and I'm happy to answer additional questions, or I love talking about fits, so if you've got fitting questions related to weapon systems, like, ooh, let's do it. I enjoy that.
Just a quick one regards your tomorrow event. If there's any prep we need to do, like if you want to join in for PvP, your roaming event, for example?
Technically, no. So the fleet I'm running tomorrow is completely new friendly. You don't need to know anything. That said, if you can get into a rapid light caracal for that fleet, that's ideal for a newer player. So that's...
What fleet are you running?
I'm running a PvP roam in Pochven. So we'll go fight other players in Pochven.
When you say rapid light, is that tier 2 rapid light or tier 1?
Tier 1's fine. Tier 2's better, but tier 1's fine.
Because I am currently training the tier 2 rockets. Well, rockets to 5.
Gotcha. Well, as long as you can run tier 1 rapid lights and a caracal. If you can't, I'll find a ship for you. Don't worry, we'll put you in a Mahala's or something. But ideally, that's the sort of the entry level ship that we like for these roams.
I can run the caracal. I don't think I can run a Mahala's.
Okay, well, if you can run the caracal, you're good to go. Come join us. We'll go get in some fights.
I'm kind of at the moment invested all in Galante, so should I try to sort out something with that, or should I just try to, like you say, regardless of this unit, try to start training to that?
Can you fly Hecates?
Don't think so. What are those?
They're T3 destroyers.
No, I can't train anything tier 2 yet.
Yeah, don't worry about this. You're good in a caracal. Alend, can you fly Hecate? Ooh.
Oh no, I'm same on the moment tier 1 still everything.
Okay.
So they can only like weaken, so like I said, mostly I'm skilled in Gallant at the moment to destroy it. and cruise at start with. But that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, we can put you in a catalyst. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a fine boat. So, yeah, we'll get you sorted. Don't worry.
Is there any like other skills then at least to try to invent, like regards the weaponry in that case? Should I try to at least quickly prep that regards?
Yeah, the most important thing I would study up on actually is not weaponry related at all, but it is to learn a little bit about Pochven if you haven't been, and the finer nuances of Pochven.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll try look up that.
Very good. And if you have questions, feel free to ping me on Discord. I'll be around. All right, y'all. Let's go ahead and wrap up the class. But again, please feel free to contact me if you've got any questions. Discord's the best way to do so.
Is it okay to ask fitty questions about all sort of things?
Yep. Yeah, you can ask philosophical questions if you want to. You may not like the answer you get, but you can ask them.
I am
Why
also
are we
always
here?
open to discuss philosophy. Like, very, very open to that.
I'm a bad philosopher. So maybe we should send philosophy questions to Bethany.
Sweet spot.
You can ask me why blasters are the best. Alright, let's wrap her up.
The answer is fairly straightforward. Damage, damage, more damage.
MOAR, more deeps. I like it. Thanks again for coming, y'all. I'll go ahead and stop the stream. I'll stay on Mumble for a couple more here.